HR leaders know hiring is getting harder. A new survey from Robert Half reveals companies are hiring for critical roles, making competition for top talent fiercer than ever. So, how do you stay ahead? With insight that matters. The Demand for Skilled Talent report from Robert Half dives deep into the hiring trends and the impact of AI on critical skills and staffing needs. Get the data that drives smarter hiring. Head to roberthalf.com/SHRM.
Welcome to the AI+HI project. I'm Nichol Bradford, SHRM's executive in residence for AI+HI. This week, we're exploring the future of leadership, collaboration, and AI-driven innovation. Our guest is Keith Ferrazzi, founder of Ferrazzi Greenlight, a world-renowned thought leader on high-performance teams, relationship building, and workplace transformation. Keith is the co-founder of the Radical Innovators Collaborative, a community of forward-thinking executives reimagining work in the age of AI. He has advised Fortune 500 companies, is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, and pioneered new approaches to leadership and team collaboration. Keith, welcome to the AI+HI project.
Nichol, it's great to see you again. This is going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to the conversation a lot.
Great. So you spent your career transforming leadership, collaboration, and teamwork. I remember never eat lunch alone. Can you share what are some of the key themes that have shaped your approach to business and innovation?
Well, first of all, I go back to my history a little bit. Years ago, I was the chief marketing officer of Deloitte. Years ago, I was the chief marketing officer at Starwood Hotels. And if you look at those two businesses, Deloitte back in the 90s had an aspiration of someday we would be up there at par with Accenture and McKinsey, et cetera. And at Starwood, we had the same aspirations. We were going to topple the juggernauts of Marriott, et cetera. And you spin ahead 10 years. And the reality is Deloitte was a band of brothers and sisters taking hills together, a term that I coined called co-elevation, wrestling ideas, pushing each other higher, challenging each other out of love and commitment. And at Starwood, we were a bunch of silos, much more competitive, much lacking the integration of the various sides of the business. And unfortunately, toward the end, we had to sell to Marriott below industry multiples. That was so powerful to me that I started a research institute back in 2000 on the future of high-performing teams. I've spent 24 years of research in understanding teaming and how important unlocking value from the interdependencies within an organization. And as you well know, never before has it been more important than in this world of AI. This is not a world of technology. This is not a world of people. It's a world of work processes. It's a world of all of those. And we've got to be able to radically team in order to find the value.
I'm excited about the Radical Innovators Collaborative to extend what you just talked about. I have gone to a couple of the dinners prior to that and was really impressed by the CHROs that I met there and also their interest and commitment to integrating AI in a helpful way. How does AI enhance or challenge this type of leadership? And can you tell the audience what the Radical Innovators Collaborative is?
Yeah, I'll start with that. So years and years ago, a young man in my organization named Frank Conju and I used to host a ton of these kind of.
I love Frank.
Isn't Frank amazing?
He's amazing.
Yeah, little shout out to Frank. We used to host tons of these within Ferrazzi Greenlight, my organization, with our clients, with our prospects, with individuals, thought leaders, et cetera. And Frank's out on his own now. He's over at Randstad. And he continues to do these with me through the Radical Innovators Collaborative. And what we're doing is we're bringing together individuals who truly want to put a stake in their organizations and make a bigger difference. And for a long period of time, we did this with HR leaders as a group. And we would have these dinners and we would go around and people would talk about the things that they were struggling with. And we'd use a format that I've created where people would ask them questions and then give them advice in very candid, feedback among peers. And people always walked away bonded, connected, feeling like they could text people on weekends to get advice, etc. But in the advent of AI, what we need to do is we needed to integrate technology and technologists. I really believe the partnership between the CIO and the CHRO has never been more important and defining of our future. Now, what's interesting is it really is a three-legged stool. You've got the people side and the change management side, the arbitration of HR. You've got the technology side, the arbitration of IT. But the other thing that you have, which I think we're missing in most of the functions, is actually the redesign of workflows, the redesign of process, and the using of tools in order to redesign workflows with AI as your partner. Now, that's not something, to be honest, that most HR executive have as a core competency, right? Workflow redesign. But it's something that we need to partner with the business. It really, if I look at my last book, which was called Never Lead Alone, Defining High-Performing Teams, 24 years of research. When you look at the heroes in that book, every chapter is grounded by a hero story and then a few practices to deliver on that shift toward teamship. What I found was that most of those heroes were engineers. These were people who had an engineering mindset, who decided to start to look at their business and re-engineer ways of working. And that's one of the things that I find missing. We're approaching the re-engineering of work with policies. During the pandemic, we spent too much time struggling about whether or not we're 2 or 3 days in the office when we should have been looking at how do we reinvent collaboration? How do we use the tools that we had at that time, software, to reinvent collaboration? Instead, we're battling about policy. What I'd like HR to do is step above the policy and start to partner with the business to actually re-engineer ways of working. That's where the breakthroughs are going to be. And what we did with Radical Innovators Collaborative is we created a consortium of technologists, of business leaders, HR leaders, and founders, because it's so important to have some of these founders who are out there fundamentally reinventing HR processes, having them right in the middle of the conversation.
I agree completely. That mix where you have builders and strategists and even some philosophers together on redesigning the workflows. One of the things we've seen, because at SHRM we're doing a lot of research and we have the vantage point to look across companies, across industries, and really seeing what's working and what's not working. And the successful companies are doing what you said about redesigning the workflows. It's kind of like a visual on it would be AI is sort of like increasing the volume like water behind a dam. And without redoing the work processes, then that it doesn't work. And the
Yeah.
increased volume is going into the old, the old way of doing things. And that's really challenging. Upwork had a bunch of research on how that was actually making teams less efficient when you bring in AI, but you don't change the workflows. So I love that.
Let me riff on that just a little bit. So one of the things that we're bringing 60 CHROs and CIOs together in a couple of weeks on this topic. And we're having two different conversations. One conversation we're having is just how do we accelerate the use of the existing AI tools that we have today? So one of the things that I find frustrating with where we are right now is we've put the tools in place. We have secure generative AI tools that anybody can use in an organization, but unfortunately, we still have fairly de minimis use of those tools. And one of the things that I've seen in my research is we need to use the same kind of change management strategy to get existing roles using generative AI as we did in the past with things like Six Sigma and Agile. I wrote an article in Forbes not long ago that calls for us to think about inviting black belts of Six Sigma into stepping up and saying, hey, listen, I would like to be out ahead of the trends in AI. So, take any role you have in your organization and make a call to that role and say, hey, any of you in this particular role would like to volunteer and say how you're using AI that you're proud of, we'd love to collect that. And let's say if there's 2,000 people in a role, usually you'll get about a 10% response, 200 people. And if you get 200 people and then you look through and you find some real nuggets or best practices, you probably only have about 50. So what you do with those 50 is you pull those 50 people together, you put them in small groups of 2 or 3, and you say to them, listen, I want you all to coach each other on the best ways to use AI to reinvent your role. Once they've done that, then you start sharing among the various groups. Those groups, let's call them black belts of AI. Now that group stands in front of the 2,000 and says, look at what we're doing. Look at how we're doing it. Look at the results that we're getting. And then what we do is we invite anybody who wants to move from being unattended to AI to becoming yellow belts, and they join the movement. And then you put a black belt in a small group of 3 coaching them. So now what you got is I think, generative AI needs to be a movement. People need to be getting into the movement, getting excited, moving forward and co-creating their future, as a group of individuals taking hills together. And that's very much what I do with executive teams as well in our coaching. It's like you want to get a group of people committed to co-elevation, committed to bold objectives, but committed to helping push each other to get there, coach each other to get there, learn each other up to get there. That's what high-performing teaming is.
And I want to go into teaming now because your work really focuses also, or a portion of it, on redesigning the collaboration across the C-suite. How do you see AI reshaping how leaders and teams work together at the highest levels? What are you seeing throughout your vantage point?
So for 24 years coaching executive teams and doing this research, what we have found is that most organizations, and this is going to sound a little heretical, but most organizations have over-indexed on leadership and under-indexed on teamship.
Yeah.
We have elevated the leader and everything that the leader needs to do. But when do we have a course? When do we teach the teams on what their responsibility is, what they need to do? I say it's one thing for a leader to give feedback. It's another thing for a leader to create an environment where the team gives each other feedback. One thing for the leader to hold the team accountable. It's another thing for the leader to get the team to hold each other accountable, for the team to earn each other's energy, for the team to lift each other up. There's 3 layers of our research. The bottom layer is the relational layer. How do you get the team to have the psychological safety to care and commit to each other's success? That we will cross the finish line together. We won't let each other fail. That's that bottom layer. The next layer is the challenge layer, the layer that turns the team into each other's coaches, where we move from conflict avoidance to candor. And that layer has simple practices that we have seen and we coach to that allow people to really step into a bolder way of interacting with each other. And then the top layer is work I've been doing for 15 years, which is how do we redefine our work and what I call 21st century collaboration? How do we use the tools? How do we use the tools of collaboration software? How do we use AI? So it's really 3 layers. The relationship layer is our foundation. The challenge layer is how a team can really commit to not letting each other fail by pushing each other higher, giving each other feedback, having high degrees of candor. And then the final layer is how do we accelerate collaboration, make it faster, make it bolder, reduce the cycle times by using the tools that we have, right? So those are the 3 layers as we think about shifting from predominant hub and spoke traditional leadership to elevating teams to meet leaders in leadership. And that's what we call teamship.
And with that definition, it's also one of the ultimate leadership skills would be to create teamship.
Indeed, it should be, but we don't teach it, right? So there's 2 components to it. You've got to teach the leader to create the environment of teamship and to use the practices of teamship. And then you've got to teach the team how their responsibility is, what's expected of them. Now, the good news is we have spent 24 years curating what we call high return practices. So I have sat and in the room with Jeff Bezos' team, and I have observed the practices of high-performing teams, had conversations, understood what goes on in Jamie Dimon's team and some of the most powerful teams in the world. And what I've identified is a set of practices that teams use that I believe cause their success. Then I take those practices out, I dust them off, and I turn them into documented practices that can be applied in multiple teams. We have a 3,000 team data set that we apply these teams to. And when we see it move the needle statistically, it becomes a high return practice. So what the book does, which is, as I mentioned, Never Lead Alone. So it's 20 years after my first book, Never Eat Alone. I write the book, Never Lead Alone. It's both an homage to the 20th year anniversary, but it's also so important that we do shift from leadership to teamship. And what we do in that book is every chapter is a critical shift, like a shift from conflict avoidance to candor, right? A shift where
Yeah.
relationships are accidental to where they're purposeful and engineered. Every chapter is a shift. Every chapter is grounded in a hero story that I talked about earlier, somebody crushing it and doing it well. And then a bunch of simple practices that I know any leader can use and eat like popcorn, and it'll elevate the team. So and there's also a diagnostic in there so you can
Mhm.
test how you're doing.
What are the ways that you are seeing just the pressure that AI is creating? What are the ways that you see that will drive a teamship model?
Yeah, so such a good question, because the reality is we have to engineer across functions and divisions in order for AI to work, right? I'll give you a for instance. If you look at the value that can be created in supply chain reengineering. So I promise you, we could take 10 to 20% of our supply chain costs out by reengineering our supply chains. But if the supply chain leader is the one who thinks that that's their job, running grounded in procurement, they're forgetting the fact that the salesperson and the sales leader is the one doing the forecasting. The manufacturing leader is the one doing the scheduling. The finance leader is the one that has the scorecard and is tracking all of that and needs to have those predictions. And if we don't create true teamship among those, and the supply chain leader is nothing more than the Sherpa of transformation, not the pedestalized leader of supply chain, you're not going to see the value. I mean, I've been working with a company called A.T. Kearney, and they're extraordinary on their supply chain. And I'm working with an AI company called Distal, extraordinary on their AI engineering. And these companies coming together with businesses, what I've seen is they've reinforced the way of thinking about teaming, and they've been getting breakthrough results because of that. But it's only when you redefine teaming that it's even possible.
Well, it's also, one of the things about AI, in addition to it being, well, one, it's not a tech upgrade, it's a social, cultural, behavioral change. But then two, it wants to be horizontal. It wants to go across all the data and it wants to go across all the teams or all of the functions
Or it
in
needs all
order
the
to,
data. It needs to
yeah,
feed on all of that to have the best answer, right?
yeah. And it needs all of the teams in order to find, the really high impact
Yeah.
items. Because if you're just using AI to do email faster, that is a very, it's useful, but it's a low impact thing.
Well,
It's really,
yep.
oh, go ahead.
No. I totally agree. I totally agree. I was just excited. You prompted me to think about something that I just wrote an article also in Forbes. I tend to write between Forbes, Fortune, and Harvard Business Review, but these pieces were recently published in Forbes. And I looked at and I interviewed a ton of founders in the recruitment space. And I looked at a ton of CHROs and chief talent officers and CIOs and talked to them about the future of recruiting with AI. Now, most HR functions have been re-engineering using AI as a complement. And so what's happening is the recruiter is using AI to design job descriptions for the hiring manager, right? And by the way, that saved them a ton of time, right? Now, what's happened is there's some founder companies that are starting from scratch, and they're looking at this and they're saying, well, wait a second. why do I need a recruiter? Like, AI can actually have a conversation quickly with a hiring manager, and we can then pull the job spec. And very quickly, we can post that on job boards. And very quickly, we can calendar, AI can calendar the potential interviews. And by the way, AI can probably triage for the hiring manager which they think is the best candidates. And they could suggest questions where there are gaps in people's resumes for the actual interviews. And then when it's done and the individual chooses the candidate, AI can actually start scheduling all the onboarding tactics and actually can begin to run a virtual interview with that person of people who they're going to be meeting on their first day and give them a virtual tour. So what we found, and I just finished this this piece in Forbes, I do believe that we're approaching a very short period of time where you're going to have humanless recruiting. And there's one particular company out there that moved from 1 million ARR to 100 million ARR in less than a year, doing just that, humanless recruiting. Now, if you engineer inside of HR with AI, the future of recruiting, you're going to find augmented recruiters. If, on the other hand, you step back and say, what's the end-to-end way to use AI in its fullest, you're going to find recruiterless recruiting. And so I think this is a bold principle. It's scary, and which brings up another issue, which is how are we having conversations with our people when in reality, a number of roles will disappear?
I want to talk about that, but before we go there, when we're thinking about how and where and when we apply AI, how do you suggest thinking about what should stay human? What should become human? Like where do we put people and where do we want people?
Yeah. I'm probably taking a more aggressive approach to this than are a lot of individuals. And I think part of the reason a lot of individuals are taking a less aggressive approach is they're fearful of the messaging of what AI will replace. And so as a result, they're kicking the can down the road by not talking about it and doing more human augmentation today. Also, the reality is in the very short term, you have a situation where AI isn't fully trained up on all of these roles, and you're going to have a lag, which a lot of companies don't want to experience in the short term. But if you look through 3 years and you look at the asymptotic nature of the change today, and you look on 3 years, it is undeniable to me that we will be radically replacing a lot of roles. I do believe that the majority of call centers will be displaced. I do believe that there are a lot of roles that will be displaced. Now, I'm not one that believes that we should be kicking the can down the road, nor turning a blind eye because of challenges of communications. I believe we should be going straight into it and then coming up with what are we going to do with these amazing souls as they're moving from these roles into whatever else there is. And I think that's even a broader role that we should be having even in DC, when you've got, some of the innovators of these technologies are now policymakers and don't seem to be providing a safety net for the people who will be displaced. So I think there's bigger and broader roles, but as a company, I would be looking at how am I going to even help use AI as a part of the transformation plan for the individuals, as even coaches. I wrote 2 of these papers that I'm going to be presenting next week. One is the humanless recruiting, and then the other one is the future of AI enabled L&D.
Just really quick, isn't the resistance that organizations are seeing, isn't part of that resistance having to do with not articulating what we're going to be doing with all of these souls? Like I find often when I'm at conferences and the question is asked, what about the people? The follow-up usually is historically, every time there's been a technology shift, there have been more jobs. But then when you try to push on that point and you actually say, okay, well, what's the plan? What are we actually going to, how are we actually going to transition people? Because I agree with you. I think it's clear there's roles that are going to disappear, but how are we going to find the new things and how do we communicate to our teams and our people what they need to learn so they can participate in that future.
There are not going to be new things that will be replacing many of these roles. This is a different technology. This is not the replacement of a horse with a tractor. This is the replacement of cognitive thinking.
Mm.
And this is a massive shift that is not going to be quickly replaced by just new people through growth.
Mhm.
AIs are going to be only increasingly taking roles that we currently consider, critical, like lawyers and accountants, inside of organizations. We're not just talking about, a chat bot with, superpowered with AI replacing a call center worker. We're talking about massive roles being replaced. And so, including coaches. I have seen systems now providing coaching that is extraordinary and inspiring, that are fully AI based. So, and that's my world, right? So, I suggest that there is a macro conversation we need to be having here that we're afraid to have. There's no question about it. And I'm working on that right now. I was just talking yesterday with the World Economic Forum folks in Davos that, how do we begin to equip our leaders to manage through this transition? But it's also a question of how do we equip our country to manage through this transition and displacement. And I think it's a critical issue. And I do feel that there's a combination of ignorance and frankly cowardice that's stopping us from having the conversation more boldly today.
What I find is that when I'm talking to people out in the field is that they're, they people understand that AI is going to eliminate roles. And then when they hear from their leaders and their leaders are not addressing this, they know something is going to happen. And so there's this gap. I feel that if we started to actually have those macro conversations, and then also if companies were having those conversations internally about, what is next, and I don't mean replacing specific roles, but I I guess my question for you now really is, like, what does the future of work actually look like in this AI-enabled world?
I think the biggest question we're going to be facing ultimately is how do we make sure that people still have purpose? And, we don't have time for this, but being a foster care parent, I've seen how the foster care system has disenabled foster children to have agentry. And I could go into this, but I don't believe that one of my dear friends is a great guy named Andrew Yang, who's been a big proponent of universal basic income. And I do believe that a solution eventually is going to be a combination of universal basic income and really looking at job works and how do we help people find purpose and how does that purpose feed society into the future. And I think that's a conversation that's a powerful and important conversation. In the world where AI has supplanted a significant amount of the workflows, how do we find purpose as people? And how can we create a structure and a social net where that's possible? And the value that's being created by AI could fund that. And it has to, right? Because we can't have what we found in my hometown of Pittsburgh, where the steel industry crashed in the 70s. And while the city rebounded of Pittsburgh, those people, my people, my family, my cousins, they never did. And they were disenfranchised and they were impoverished along the Monongahela and they never rebounded. And that's why we had our political unrest in the last few elections, because those individuals shifted because they were pissed off at what the Democrats didn't do for them way back when. And they were just looking for hope. And we're going to find the same kind of disruption in the future if we don't be very proactive in thinking about that path. And that's things that I'm working on right now. Look, at the end of the day, this is all through my foundation, the Radical Innovators Collaborative, that Frank and I started, and T-Mobile started, and and SHRM. You guys have been amazing in the early formation of this. But, look, humbly me, I still believe that my core work as a firm is about high-performing teams. And I do believe that that's the only way we're going to solve this problem. We're going to solve it through high-performing teams coming together and crushing it together as a team. This is not siloed. It's not just leaders. We've got to find this solution as a collective. And hopefully the book is a good roadmap for that.
Yeah, and high-performing teams coming together to discover what's the right thing for their company and their community. And so, because the reality is that we don't actually have the solutions today. We have to discover them. Okay, so let's take it back to our audience who today many of them are at the beginning of their journey, or they might just have gotten through the first several rounds of pilots and they're starting to experience resistance. How would you advise them to create a
Yeah.
fertile ground for these changes?
Yeah. I'm just finishing this piece right now. Haven't decided where it's going to be published. So just type my name and just type about Keith Ferrazzi accelerating AI in the workplace. Number one, we've got to get an excitement among people to be at the forefront of this amazing blessing of a new tool. And that's the idea of calling people to a movement and getting people excited to take hills together, reinvent roles, etc. Look, not everybody's going to disappear in a role overnight, but the ones that will disappear are the ones that are resisting even the use of the tools. So if you're at the front of the pack, if you're calling people to be black belts of AI, those are the individuals that have staying power in organizations. The second thing you need to do is begin to ask yourself, what workflows are we going to reinvent? What workflows are we going to reinvent, and who are our teams to achieve it? And stop looking at the org chart. Just because your org chart is how you get paid or how you get your review, it has nothing to do with how work is done. So the stepping is just pick a couple of critical workflows, just a couple. You could do recruitment. You could do doing annual performance reviews. You could save 40% of people's time doing annual performance reviews by reinventing that process alone. You could pick supply chain as a big one, right? But you don't think if you're an HR leader that that's your job, but of course it's your job. Anything that's re-engineering the way people work, I believe is anybody's job today for the taking. Is it going to be the IT's job? Is it going to be the business leader's job? Is it your job? It's a collective and you can be their Sherpa. So that's the second step. Just pick a critical process to be re-engineered and humbly reach out to your peers and say, let's go crush this together. Let's go crush this together, because you can only do it as a team.
Yes. And the final question is for a leader just beginning their journey and they're looking across the organization who their partners are. Would you speak a little bit about how they might create a relationship with the CIO or other people in the organization?
Yeah, thank you. In my book, Never Lead Alone, I talk about how do we reach out and enlist new teammates. And the first philosophy is this: if you want to reinvent the future of recruiting, then you reach out to the CIO or somebody within the IT organization that has responsibility for HR and say, I would love to invite you into a team that we could co-create reinventing the future of recruiting. The first person you invite into your team, you're inviting them into their team. This really is an equality, and you need to reach out with humility. You need to reach out with that excitement. You need to let people know that this is a career redefining opportunity for all of us, and that we could truly deliver a radical elevation in performance, in customer experience, in shareholder value. And we can do this together, and we couldn't do it otherwise if we weren't together. That's the pitch. That's the pitch. It's a humility. It's an excitement. It's an onboarding into co-ownership. And then you dive into the actual nitty-gritty work.
So everyone in the audience, first step is reach out and enlist the people across your organization in the way that Keith described. Gosh, Keith, we could talk forever. This is all so interesting. But for now, that's it for this week's episode of the AI+HI Project. A big thank you to Keith Ferrazzi for sharing your insights on radical innovation, AI-driven collaboration, and the future of leadership. Before we wrap up, everyone, I encourage you to follow the AI+HI Project wherever you enjoy your podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, please take a moment to leave a review, comment, and share the episode. It really helps spread the word. You can also find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/AIHI. Thanks for joining the conversation, and we'll catch you next time.
Hiring is evolving. Is your business? Explore the Demand for Skilled Talent report from Robert Half to see how AI is shaping the future of hiring. Visit roberthalf.com/SHRM.
SHRM.